It's time to settle in, because we've got another gripping tale for you today on AGS Stories. Family is supposed to be our safe haven, a place of love and support, but sometimes, those closest to us can inflict the deepest wounds. Today's story dives into a world of betrayal, resilience, and the struggle to rebuild after toxic relationships. My ex-husband and his family abandoned me and my kids during my most vulnerable moments. Now they're begging for my help after losing everything. Few things in life test our strength and self-worth like betrayal from those we once trusted. Let's unpack this intense and thought-provoking story together. Megan Thompson always thought she had her life perfectly mapped out. At 34, she had carved out a successful career as the head of marketing at a prominent tech company, paid off most of her mortgage, and felt proud of being financially independent. On top of that, she was married to Ryan, a kind and charming man who always spoke about the importance of family. Ryan's devotion to his family, especially his younger brother Eric and their widowed mother Susan, was one of the things Megan found most admirable about him. Susan had been a single mother ever since Ryan and Eric lost their father in a tragic accident years ago. The brothers had stepped up, vowing to take care of her, and Megan found this devotion touching. It made her feel lucky to be joining a family that cared so deeply for one another. At first, everything seemed perfect. Susan welcomed Megan with open arms, complimenting her achievements and making her feel like part of the family. "Marketing, huh?" Susan had said over coffee during their first Christmas together, nodding approvingly. "That sounds like an important job." Megan basked in the warm acceptance, eager to contribute to the close-knit bond she admired so much. Their weekends were filled with lively family barbecues, game nights, and holiday gatherings at Susan's house. Megan loved those moments. She could still remember one Thanksgiving when the entire extended family squeezed around Susan's dining table, laughing and teasing each other. "Pass the gravy, Ryan," Eric had shouted, only for Susan to quip, "You've had enough gravy for a lifetime." Everyone roared with laughter, and Megan felt like she truly belonged. But as the years passed, cracks began to form in the seemingly perfect family dynamic. Little things Susan said started to sting, jabs disguised as jokes, and Megan noticed that Ryan and Eric were quick to laugh along with their mother, even when her remarks hurt others. It wasn't long before Megan began to feel like an outsider looking in, realizing the warm embrace of Susan's family wasn't as genuine as it once seemed. The stage was set for a series of events that would change everything. It started with the small things, little remarks Susan made during family gatherings that Megan brushed off as harmless. A comment about a relative's outfit here, a snide remark about someone's new car there, things Megan chalked up to Susan's sharp sense of humor. But over time, the jokes began to sting more, especially when Megan noticed how Susan loved to whisper them to Ryan and Eric, her two loyal sons. They'd laugh with her, even when her words were cruel. Megan remembers the first time Susan's comments were directed at her. It was at a New Year's Eve party. She had overheard Susan snickering in the living room with Ryan and Eric, talking about a relative's struggles. "Some people should just know their place," Susan had said, a smug smile on her face. Megan's stomach twisted in discomfort, but she convinced herself it wasn't her business to step in. However, things escalated. The whispers turned into pointed remarks about Megan herself. Susan began questioning Megan's decisions, her career, and even her contributions to the family. "Don't you think you work too much, Megan?" Susan asked one day, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. A woman's priority should be her family, not her job. Ryan never defended Megan. Instead, he stayed silent, avoiding confrontation with his mother. Megan tried to talk to him about it, explaining how Susan's remarks made her feel belittled, but Ryan would shrug it off. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." Things became more difficult when Megan found out she was pregnant. She had always envisioned pregnancy as a joyful time, something that would bring her closer to Ryan and his family, but from the beginning, it was rough. Constant nausea, dizziness, and doctors' warning of complications kept Megan on edge. She had to quit her job and go on bed rest, a decision that shattered her sense of independence. Susan wasn't supportive. Pregnant women have been doing this for centuries. she said dismissively when Megan mentioned her difficulties. "You're not the first woman to have a baby, you know." Ryan wasn't much better. He started coming home late, citing work commitments or nights out with colleagues. Megan often found herself alone, staring at the clock, wondering when or if he'd walk through the door. The day of her C-section was a turning point. Megan had been terrified, her vision worsening to the point where she could barely see the hospital room around her. As nurses prepped her for surgery, she asked for Ryan, but he was nowhere to be found. He said he'd rather wait outside, the nurse told her, sympathy evident in her voice. When Ryan finally came into the recovery room hours later, his face was a mask of discomfort. "This whole thing isn't normal," he said, barely glancing at their newborn son. "Women used to give birth without all this surgery crap. Men shouldn't have to be here for it." His words cut deeper than any physical pain Megan was feeling. She realized then how little support she could count on from her husband. But the real blow came weeks later when Ryan sat her down and told her she needed to go back to work. "I can't," Megan said, shocked. "My eyesight hasn't recovered, and the baby needs me." "We'll hire a nanny," Ryan replied, his tone cold. "We can't afford for you to sit at home all day." It wasn't just words. Ryan drained their joint savings account, the money Megan had carefully set aside during her career, for his brother Eric's extravagant Hawaiian wedding. Megan found out days before her second scheduled C-section when Ryan walked into the house with a suitcase full of summer clothes. "What are you doing?" she asked, panic rising. "Tom's wedding is next week," Ryan said casually, barely looking at her. "But my surgery, who's going to take care of our son?" "You'll manage," he said dismissively before walking out the door. Left with no savings, a toddler, and a high-risk pregnancy, Megan broke down. She managed to get through the emergency C-section with the help of her parents, who took her and the children in after the birth. Ryan didn't call, didn't check if she or the baby were okay. He stayed in Hawaii, attending his brother's wedding and posting photos online, smiling alongside Susan, Eric, and his new sister-in-law. The betrayal was more than Megan could bear. She filed for divorce, knowing she couldn't continue to live like this. Ryan's reaction was predictably cruel. "You're a quitter," he spat when she told him. "You've always been weak." But Megan wasn't weak. She knew she had to be strong for her children. As she rebuilt her life, she leaned on her parents and began piecing together the fragments of her self-worth. She returned to work, found a new place to live, and made sure her children had everything they needed. Months later, Megan got word of Ryan's family's downfall. The woman Eric married, the one Susan had gushed over as the perfect daughter-in-law, had conned them all. She drained their accounts, mortgaged Susan's house, and disappeared with millions. They lost everything. Megan thought she had moved past it all until Susan called, begging for help. "The children need their father and grandmother," Susan pleaded. "We're family." Megan's mind reeled. Family? Where was that family when she was bedridden, terrified for her unborn child? Where was that family when her savings were stolen, or when Ryan left her to fend for herself with no support? Now, Megan turns to the community for advice. "What do I do?" she writes. "Do I help them for the sake of my children, or do I keep my distance to protect the life I've rebuilt? How do you deal with toxic family members who have betrayed you time and again?" Megan knows what she feels in her heart, but part of her is still torn. The idea of turning her back on anyone, even Susan and Ryan, feels wrong. But after everything they've done, how can she trust them again? She closes her post with a plea for guidance. "I want to do what's best for my kids, but I also don't want them to grow up thinking it's okay to let people walk all over them. How do you set boundaries with family without feeling like the villain?" Now, Megan waits, hoping the community can offer her the clarity she so desperately needs. Megan's post quickly gained traction, with hundreds of comments flooding in as people shared their opinions on her situation. The story resonated deeply with readers, sparking heated discussions about boundaries, toxic family dynamics, and the challenges of co-parenting with an absent partner. Many commenters empathized with Megan's plight, applauding her resilience and urging her to protect herself and her children at all costs. They highlighted the importance of maintaining boundaries and not allowing Susan or Ryan to manipulate her further. However, Others argued that Meghan should consider mending ties for the sake of her children, suggesting that family connections, no matter how flawed, could provide value in the long run. One of the most upvoted comments came from @StrongerTogether87, who wrote, "Meghan, you've been through so much already, and the fact that you're still standing is a testament to your strength. You've built a safe, stable environment for your kids, and that should be your top priority. Allowing Ryan or Susan back into your life will only bring chaos. Your kids don't need toxic relationships. They need a parent who sets a strong example of self-respect. Stay firm and don't let guilt sway you." This sentiment was echoed by many others who felt Meghan had done the right thing by prioritizing her children and cutting ties with people who had repeatedly betrayed her. Several users pointed out that Susan and Ryan only reached out when they needed something, not out of genuine remorse or a desire to repair their relationship with Meghan or her kids. On the other hand, @FamilyMatters52 offered a different perspective, suggesting reconciliation. "I get that you're hurt, and you have every right to feel that way. But at the end of the day, Ryan and Susan are still your children's father and grandmother. Maybe this is their chance to turn over a new leaf. I'm not saying you should trust them blindly, but perhaps you could set some ground rules and see if they're willing to change. Your kids might benefit from having more family in their lives, even if it's on limited terms." This comment sparked a heated debate in the replies. Some agreed that reconciliation could provide the children with a broader support system, while others argued that exposing them to toxic people would do more harm than good. Another user, @NoMoreDrama99, was blunt in their advice. "They've already shown you who they are, Meghan. Believe them. Ryan abandoned you during your most vulnerable moments and stole from you. Susan enabled his behavior and belittled you for years. These aren't people you can trust around your kids, let alone in your life. Block them, move on, and focus on the family you've built for yourself. You don't owe them anything." The contrasting viewpoints left Meghan with a lot to consider. Some commenters suggested compromises, like allowing Susan and Ryan supervised visits with the children, while others encouraged her to demand genuine accountability from them before even thinking about reopening communication. As Meghan read through the comments, she felt a mixture of relief and confusion. It was comforting to know that so many people supported her decision to prioritize her children and her mental health. At the same time, the idea of cutting ties completely weighed heavily on her. What if her children grew up resenting her for keeping them away from their father and grandmother? Still, the majority of commenters seemed to agree on one thing. Meghan's first responsibility was to her children's well-being, and she had every right to protect them from harm, even if that harm came from their own family. Meghan returned to her post a few weeks later to share updates and dig deeper into the complex emotions she was grappling with. Sitting in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, she reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short amount of time. Moving back home had been both a relief and a painful reminder of how far she had fallen from the independent, successful woman she once was. "First, I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment on my story," Meghan began. "Your advice and encouragement have been a lifeline for me in a time when I've felt so alone." Meghan detailed how she'd officially filed for divorce. The process, though emotionally exhausting, had gone surprisingly smoothly. Ryan hadn't contested anything. He returned the money he'd drained from their account, signed over the house to Meghan without a fight, and even agreed to pay a modest amount of child support. To her, it felt less like an act of goodwill, and more like Ryan was washing his hands of her entirely, eager to move on with his life. "My parents have been incredible," she wrote. "They've helped me care for my 2 boys while I've focused on healing, emotionally and physically. It's been hard to admit I needed help, but I'm trying to remind myself that there's no shame in leaning on people who love you." Meghan's parents had welcomed her and the boys with open arms, doting on their grandchildren and giving Meghan the space she needed to recover from the trauma of her marriage. For the first time in years, she felt safe. But the safety was fragile, and it was shaken when she heard about what had happened to Ryan's family. "I didn't think it was possible, but things have gotten worse for them," Meghan wrote. Susan called me last week in tears, telling me everything. Melissa, the picture-perfect wife Ryan's brother Eric had married, had been running a massive scam. She had convinced Eric and Susan to mortgage their homes and pour every penny they had into a fake financial venture. By the time the truth came out, Melissa was long gone, leaving a trail of debt and destruction behind her. "They've lost everything," Megan explained. "Susan's house was seized, Eric is drowning in loans, and Ryan, well, let's just say his dreams of becoming wealthy have officially gone up in smoke. They're living in a tiny apartment now, barely scraping by." It wasn't long before Susan reached out to Megan, begging for help. She called me and went on and on about how the kids need their father and grandmother in their lives, Megan wrote. She asked if they could stay with me just until they got back on their feet. She even tried to guilt me, saying, "Family sticks together in hard times, Megan." Megan admitted that she was torn. Part of her wanted to slam the door shut on Susan and Ryan, knowing how much they had hurt her. But another part of her felt guilty. What if Susan was right? What if her boys would one day resent her for keeping them away from their father and grandmother? "I'll be honest," Megan confessed. "There's still a part of me that wants to believe they can change, that maybe hitting rock bottom will finally make them see the damage they've caused. But I don't know if I can trust them again. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to go through that kind of pain all over again." Megan's update was filled with raw emotion. She described the nights she spent lying awake, wondering if she was making the right choices for her children. Every decision felt heavy with consequence, and the weight of it all was becoming unbearable. Her boys, she said, were her guiding light. Her oldest, now 3, was thriving in the stability of her parents' home, surrounded by love and support. Her youngest was a happy, curious toddler who brought joy to everyone he met. "I look at them, and I know I have to protect them," Megan wrote. "But how do I balance that with teaching them about forgiveness? Am I robbing them of important relationships, or am I saving them from the same heartache I've been through?" She ended her update with another plea for advice. "What would you do if you were in my shoes?" she asked. "How do you set boundaries without cutting people off completely? Is it possible to let them back into our lives without putting my kids or myself at risk?" Megan also acknowledged how much stronger she had become since her story first began. Moving in with her parents, filing for divorce, and rebuilding her life had all been steps toward reclaiming her independence. But she knew there was still work to be done, and she wasn't sure if her next steps would lead her toward healing or heartbreak. "I don't want to make decisions out of anger or fear," she wrote, "but I also can't ignore the pain they've caused me. My kids deserve better, and I'm doing everything I can to give them a life full of love and stability. But sometimes I wonder, is that enough?" Megan's post ended on a bittersweet note, capturing the uncertainty and complexity of her situation. As she waited for the community's responses, she hoped for clarity, knowing that no matter what, she had to stay strong, for herself and for her children. Megan's update left the community buzzing with opinions as readers weighed in on her dilemma. While most people supported her decision to prioritize her children and protect them from toxic influences, others challenged her to reconsider the long-term impact of cutting off family ties. Megan read the comments carefully, appreciating the diverse perspectives, but still feeling torn. One of the most supportive comments came from @mom-of-3hopeful, who wrote, "Megan, you've done so much to rebuild your life and create a safe environment for your boys. Don't let Susan or Ryan tear that down. They've already shown they don't respect you or your boundaries. Letting them back in will only teach your children that it's okay to accept harmful behavior from family. Stay firm, and don't let guilt push you into a situation that could hurt your family again. You're doing the right thing by prioritizing their well-being." This comment garnered hundreds of upvotes, with many agreeing that Megan's first responsibility was to her children. Several users pointed out that Ryan and Susan only seemed to reach out when they needed something, which spoke volumes about their priorities. However, not everyone agreed. @FamilyFirst42 offered a more nuanced take. "I understand where you're coming from, Megan, but at the end of the day, Ryan and Susan are still your kid's father and grandmother. Cutting them off completely might solve things in the short term, but what happens when your boys grow up and start asking questions? Maybe you could try supervised visits or set very clear boundaries. That way, your children still have some connection to their family, but you're in control of the situation. This perspective sparked debate, with some agreeing that limited contact could be a compromise, while others argued that Ryan and Susan's history of betrayal made any form of reconciliation risky. Megan herself couldn't ignore the validity in both points of view. She agreed with the need to protect her children, but couldn't shake the fear that she might be depriving them of relationships they'd one day regret not having. Still, she knew that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight, and her primary goal was to ensure her boys grew up surrounded by love, respect, and stability. For now, Megan resolved to focus on the life she was building for her family. As she read through the comments, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The community's validation gave her strength, while the dissenting opinions encouraged her to reflect further on what would be best for her boys in the long run. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Megan was ready to face it head-on. When Megan hung up on Susan after her desperate plea for help, she sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the phone in her hand. Her heart pounded, not from guilt but from the sheer weight of finality. This was the end of a chapter she had been clinging to for far too long. There was no going back now, and while part of her felt lighter, another part still wrestled with the shadows of doubt. For days, Susan's words echoed in her mind. The children need their father and grandmother. Megan replayed the conversation over and over, wondering if she had done the right thing. But every time, she landed on the same conclusion. The so-called family that Susan was so desperate to reunite wasn't one that had ever supported or valued her. They had torn her down, used her, and abandoned her in her most vulnerable moments. No, Megan decided, her children didn't need people like that in their lives. The distance from Ryan's family had brought an unexpected calm to Megan's home. For the first time in years, she felt free to live on her own terms. There were no whispered insults at family gatherings, no strained silences with Ryan, and no biting remarks from Susan disguised as jokes. Her boys thrived in the loving environment she had created with her parents, and Megan herself was rediscovering a version of herself she thought she had lost. "I feel like I can breathe again," Megan wrote in her final update to the community. "For so long, I was drowning in their toxicity, but now I wake up every day feeling hopeful. My boys are happy, healthy, and surrounded by people who truly care about them. That's all I ever wanted." Returning to work had been another step toward regaining her independence. While her new job didn't pay as much as her previous position, it offered her the flexibility she needed to balance her responsibilities as a mother. Megan poured herself into her work, finding joy in small victories and building new relationships with colleagues who respected her. "I won't lie and say it's easy," she admitted. "There are days when I feel overwhelmed, and the weight of being a single mom hits me hard. But every time I look at my boys, I know it's all worth it. They're my everything, and I'll do whatever it takes to give them the life they deserve." Megan also reflected on the consequences Ryan and his family had faced. Susan had been forced to take a cashier job at a local grocery store to make ends meet, a stark contrast to the life of comfort she had once enjoyed. Eric had moved into a cramped studio apartment, working odd jobs to stay afloat. And Ryan? Megan didn't know much about his current situation, but word had gotten back to her that he was struggling to find stable work. The grand financial empire he had dreamed of building with Eric and Melissa was now nothing more than a shattered illusion. "I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small part of me that feels satisfaction in seeing them face the consequences of their actions," Megan confessed. "But mostly, I just feel relief. Relief that I walked away when I did, that I protected myself and my boys from the fallout of their choices. I'm grateful every single day that we're safe from their chaos." Megan's sons, now 3 and 1, had become her source of strength and joy. Her oldest had started preschool and came home every day brimming with stories about his new friends and adventures. Her youngest, a curious toddler with a contagious laugh, kept her on her toes, but filled their home with laughter. "They don't need Ryan or Susan," Megan wrote. "They have all the love and support they could ever want right here. My parents have been incredible, and the boys adore their grandparents. This is the family we've built, and it's enough." The community's response to Megan's final update was overwhelmingly supportive. Readers praised her strength and resilience, commending her for prioritizing her children and creating a stable, loving home for them. Many echoed the sentiment that family isn't defined by blood, but by love and respect. "I'm not the same person I was when this all started," Megan concluded. "I've learned how to stand up for myself, to set boundaries, and to value my own worth. I've learned that it's okay to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're family. Most importantly, I've learned that my boys and I are stronger than I ever thought possible." As Megan wrote the final lines of her post, she felt a deep sense of closure. She wasn't just moving on from Ryan and Susan, she was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of brighter days ahead. Though the scars of her past remained, Megan no longer let them define her. She had built a new life from the ashes of the old, one where she and her boys could thrive without the weight of toxicity dragging them down. And for the first time in years, Megan felt truly free. As Megan closed the door on one of the most challenging chapters of her life, she realized how much she had learned, not just about others, but about herself. Looking back, every betrayal, every hurtful word, and every sleepless night had shaped her into the person she was today, a stronger, more resilient mother who refused to let her past define her future. "The biggest lesson I've learned is the importance of setting boundaries," Megan shared. "For years, I allowed people like Susan and Ryan to take advantage of me because I thought keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But I've learned that saying no isn't selfish, it's necessary. Protecting my children and my peace isn't just my right, it's my responsibility." Megan reflected on how freeing it had been to prioritize her own well-being and the well-being of her boys. By stepping away from the toxic cycle of manipulation and neglect, she had given herself the chance to create a life filled with love, stability, and genuine support. "There's this misconception that family comes first, no matter what," Megan said. "But I've come to realize that family isn't about blood, it's about love, respect, and mutual care. If someone, family or not, is hurting you, you have every right to distance yourself. It's not your job to carry the weight of their choices." Another key lesson Megan took away from her experience was the importance of self-respect. In the past, she had tolerated behavior from Ryan and Susan that chipped away at her confidence and self-worth. Now, she was determined to never let anyone make her feel small again. "I used to think staying quiet was the best way to avoid conflict," Megan admitted, "but staying quiet only allowed the pain to grow. Speaking up, setting boundaries, and walking away when necessary, that's what strength looks like. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Megan's story was also a testament to the power of resilience. She had faced immense challenges, from single motherhood to financial struggles, but she had persevered. With the help of her parents and her determination to provide a better life for her boys, she had rebuilt her world, piece by piece. "I want anyone watching this to know that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward," Megan said with a smile. "It's not always easy, and it might take time, but you are stronger than you think. Don't be afraid to take that first step toward a better life." As Megan's story came to a close, she invited the audience to reflect on their own experiences. If you've ever faced challenges with family, toxic relationships, or just finding your own strength, I'd love to hear your story, she said. "Let's keep this conversation going. What lessons have you learned? How have you grown? Your story might just inspire someone else to take the first step toward change." Megan ended with a heartfelt call to action. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the AGS Stories channel for more inspiring and thought-provoking content. We're building a community here, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. As the video faded to black, Megan's message lingered, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, growth and healing are always possible. All it takes is the courage to choose yourself.